That foundation is functionally part of our common area now. So the smart thing is for you to stop fussing and let the community enjoy what it paid for. That was Brenda Coyle, president of the Stone Ridge Vista Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing on a concrete slab that sat 3 feet inside my property line, telling me to be reasonable about a building she had just poured on land that was mine. The slab was for the new clubhouse. The line it crossed belonged to a parcel my wife and I bought in 1994, the year before the subdivision behind me ever broke ground. What Brenda did not know, what she never once bothered to check in the 11 months her crew worked back there, was that I spent 31 years as a licensed land surveyor for the county, and that the original plat of her entire development carried my stamp and my signature in the lower right corner. I knew exactly where that line ran because I had walked it, shot it, and set the pins myself. So when she told me to stop fussing, I did. I let them finish. What would you have done? Standing at your own fence, watching a $500,000 building rise on ground you could prove was yours, with a document recorded before her HOA existed. My name is Walter Hale. I am 63 years old, and for most of my working life, I measured land for a living in a county where the mountains make every boundary a negotiation between a paper description and the stubborn shape of the ground itself. 31 years I carried a license. I have stood in creek beds in November with a level rod numb in my hands, and I have argued the position of a single section corner in front of 3 judges than 1, because the corner was where I said it was. A surveyor does not get to be approximately right. The whole trade is the discipline of being exactly right and being able to show your work. I retired 4 years ago, hung the transit in the shop, and figured I was done with other people's lines for good. My wife, Carol, and I bought our place on Quarry Road in 1994. 11 acres of pine and meadow, with a creek along the north edge and a flat bench above it, where she always said we would put a real garden someday. We paid for it with money she had saved teaching school and money I had saved walking ground. And we built the house ourselves over 2 summers, hauling the lumber up the grade in a borrowed flatbed and setting the corner posts by hand. I shot the corners of our own lot the week we closed, the way a baker brings home bread, because it was what I knew how to do, and because Carol laughed at me for it. She said only a surveyor would survey his own backyard before he unpacked the kitchen. I told her a man should know exactly what he owns. I did not know then how much that sentence would come to mean. Carol passed 3 years back, in the spring, and the garden on the bench was half planted when she went. Our daughter Nora, who is 17 now, has lived with me since, sleeping in the room that looks out over that bench. I finished the garden the next year because Carol had marked the rows on a sheet of graph paper, and I am a man who follows a drawing. Nora helped me set the stakes for the beds, and we used the same string and line level I used on a job site. And when we were done, the rows were straighter than any garden has a right to be. It is the kind of thing that holds a person together when the larger thing has come apart. You measure something true, and you set it down, and it stays where you put it. I want to be plain about something before I go any further. I am not a man who looks for fights. In 31 years of running boundaries, I learned that most disputes come from honest confusion. 2 neighbors with 2 surveys that do not agree. An old fence built by feel instead of by law. The job was to find the truth on the ground and write it down so clearly that no one had to argue. I carried that habit home. Every letter, every notice, every photograph, every measurement that came out of the trouble with Stone Ridge Vista went into a labeled folder on the shelf above my desk, and the folder grew thick long before anyone but me understood why it mattered. The subdivision went in on the old Pruitt Ranch in 1995, the year after we bought. I surveyed it. That is not a coincidence I am proud of or ashamed of. It is simply the fact that anchors this whole story. The developer was a man named Ledbetter, gone now, who hired the firm I worked for, and I drew the plat, set the monuments, and certified the boundaries of all 84 lots and the common parcels between them. I spent the better part of 2 months on that ground. I remember it the way you remember a long job, by the weather and the trouble in it. There was a wet spring that year that turned the lower lots to soup, and a dispute with Ledbetter over where the road easement could run, which I settled by walking him out to the ground and showing him the grade he was asking me to ignore. The eastern edge of that subdivision butts directly against the west line of my 11 acres. That was the one boundary on the whole job I had a personal stake in, and so it is the one I shot twice and checked against the section corner a third time. Because a man does not want to be the surveyor who shorted himself or his neighbor. I set the iron pin that marks the corner where their common area meets my meadow on a cold morning in October. I drove it 18 inches into the ground with a sledge, the frost already in the top inch of soil so that the first blows rang off it, and I capped it with a brass marker stamped with my license number and the year. I troweled a little concrete collar around it the way you do for a corner you want to outlast you. That pin is still there. I have checked it 100 times in 30 years, walking the line on a Sunday the way some men walk to a fence to think. I can put my hand on it in the dark, and I have more than once since Carol died, when sleep would not come and the only thing that steadied me was standing on a corner I knew was true. For 20-some years, there was no trouble at all. The HOA managed its own side of the line, mowed its little greenbelt, ran its pool, and left me to my pines. And I left them to their covenants and their pool rules and their annual argument about the color of the mailboxes. We were good neighbors in the way that good fences make, each of us clear on where the other began. Then Brenda Coyle was elected president, and a year after that, her husband, Doug, formed a company called Vista Amenity Partners. And the trouble started the way trouble usually does, quietly, with a friendly letter. The first letter came on a Tuesday in March, 2 years ago. It was printed on heavy cream paper with the Stone Ridge Vista crest at the top. And it informed me that the association was planning a community wellness facility and would appreciate my cooperation regarding the shared boundary area. I read it twice. There was nothing in it that asked permission for anything, and nothing that named what they actually wanted. I drove down to their next open board meeting, sat in a folding chair in the clubhouse they had at the time, and listened to Brenda describe a vision of a new building with a gym, a great room, and a covered patio that would, in her words, finally give Stone Ridge the centerpiece it deserves. She had a rendering on an easel, a glossy drawing of a timber and stone lodge with happy people on the patio. And she walked the room through it the way a saleswoman walks you through a kitchen. She wore a magenta blazer and a string of pearls, and she had a way of pushing her reading glasses up into her hair when she wanted to look at the room instead of her notes, which she did often because she liked looking at the room. When the floor opened, I stood and said that I was glad to see the community investing, and that any construction simply needed to respect the recorded property line on the east edge, and that I would be happy to walk that line with their engineer any time, at no charge, and show them my corner. Brenda smiled at me the way you smile at a child who has wandered into an adult conversation. "Mr. Hale," she said, "we have professionals handling all of that. I'm sure you don't need to worry about the technical side." A few people chuckled. I am a big man and a slow talker, and I know how I read to a room that does not know me, like the old fellow who's going to hold up the meeting over a fence. I did not try to fix the impression. I said only that the offer stood, and I sat down. That was incident 1, and I wrote it in the folder that night, The date, the room, the rendering on the easel, and her exact words. Because in my experience, the first dismissal is the one everything else is built on, and you want it preserved clean. Over the next several months, the surveyors came. I watched them from my bench with a cup of coffee, the way I had once been watched from 100 porches myself. They were young, 2 of them, competent enough in their movements, working off a boundary survey commissioned by Doug's company, and they set their stakes along a line that ran a full 3 feet east of my brass-capped pin, swallowing a strip of my meadow into what their orange lath labeled common area. I knew that line was wrong the moment I saw where they put the first stake. A wrong line is not a mystery to a man who set the right one. It is like a wrong note to someone with a song in his head. I let them work a full day before I went down, because I wanted to see how far the error ran, and it ran the whole length, a clean parallel offset, the signature of a survey that had started from the wrong control point and never checked itself against a monument. I walked down the second morning, introduced myself, and asked the lead, a sandy-haired kid named Tyler, whether he had tied his work to the existing corners. He said he had worked off the coordinates in his file. I asked him to walk 20 feet east with me, and I crouched and brushed the leaves off my pin and showed him the brass cap, the license number, the year, the little concrete collar. He read it. He read it again. Then he stood up and looked back at his stakes, and I watched the arithmetic happen on his face. The line he had set against the monument that said his line was 3 feet off. He said he would have to talk to his office. He was honest, that kid, just junior. And I have thought since that he probably did call his office and was told to leave it alone. I never heard from the office. What I heard instead, 8 days later, was Incident 2. Incident 2 was a violation notice taped to my own gate, citing me for encroachment of vegetation into the association easement and assessing a fine of $250. The vegetation was my pines, standing where they had stood for 40 years on ground I owned. I stood at my gate reading it twice, feeling the old heat come up the back of my neck. And then I did what the heat is for, which is nothing yet. I photographed the notice, the gate, and the trees, measured the distance from the nearest trunk to my pin with a tape so the photo had a number in it, and filed all of it. Then I drove to the county recorder's office, pulled the original plat, the one I drew, and a certified copy of my own deed, and I laid them side by side on my kitchen table next to the violation notice. The deed and the plat agreed with each other and with the pin in the ground. The HOA's new survey agreed with none of them. I did not send an angry letter. I made copies, labeled them by date, and put them in the folder. The folder was getting thick. I should tell you about Nora here, because she is the reason I kept my temper through all of it. That spring she was 15, and she had started coming down to the line with me when the crews were out, not to argue, just to watch. She is a quiet, observant kid, more like Carol than like me. One evening, she stood looking at the orange stakes marching across our meadow and said, "Dad, they put their line in the wrong place on purpose, didn't they?" I told her I did not know if it was on purpose, but that the line was wrong, and that we would prove it the right way with paper when the time came. She nodded like that made sense to her. "You always say the ground doesn't lie," she said. "I always say the paper and the ground have to agree," I told her. "And when they don't, somebody made a mistake or told one." She started keeping her own little notebook after that, dates and times when the crews came, and I would be lying if I said it did not steady me to have her beside me, writing things down. The reason Brenda wanted those extra 3 feet became clear that summer, and it was not about aesthetics. I learned it the way you learn most things in a small place, by accident, from a neighbor. Frank Mott lives on the Stone Ridge side. A retired long-haul driver with a gray mustache and a diesel pickup he keeps cleaner than his house. And he never had much use for the board or its mailbox arguments. He stopped his truck at my gate one afternoon, let it idle, and leaned out the window. He said he had been on the building committee for about a month before he quit it in disgust, and that he had seen the contract. Doug Coyle's Vista Amenity Partners had signed a management deal with the HOA to build and then operate the new clubhouse, charging the association a monthly fee for the privilege. And the fee, Frank said, was tied to a tier in the contract that kicked in, only if the great room cleared a certain square footage. 3 more feet of width pushed the great room past that number. That was the whole of it. Brenda was not stealing my meadow for the community. She was stealing it for her husband's monthly check. I asked Frank if he was sure. He said he had read it twice and had half a mind to read it to the whole membership at a meeting, and that if it ever came to a court or county hearing, he would swear to what he had seen. And he meant it, I could tell. Because men who drove 1,000,000 miles alone do not say things they do not mean. I thanked him. I did not tell him the rest of what I knew, the deed, the plat, the pin, because a thing kept quiet keeps its edge. I wrote down Incident 3 that night, the date, Frank's account, the word tier, and the real motive sat in the folder now too, under the fines and the photographs, waiting. The escalation came in steps after that, each one neat enough to count. In July, they sent a second fine, $500 this time, for failure to remediate the easement encroachment. That made 2 notices and $750 in fines on land I owned, and a fine on trees older than the HOA itself. In August, a man in a polo shirt and a lanyard came to my gate and announced he was there for a compliance inspection. He was sweating in the heat and clearly disliked the assignment. He had no county identification, no warrant, and a badge that, when I looked closely, said nothing more official than Stone Ridge Vista Community Standards, the kind of thing a man can order off the internet in an afternoon. I asked him who issued the badge. He said the association. I asked him if the association had jurisdiction to inspect private land outside its boundary, and he said he was just told to go look at the trees. I told him he was welcome to inspect anything he liked from his own side of my pin, and that the pin was about 40 feet that way, and he left in a hurry. I photographed him, his vehicle, and his plate, and that was Incident 4. Through all of it, the great room rose, footings in the spring, then the slab, then the framed walls going up board by board, then the trusses craned into place against the mountains. 3 feet of all of it standing on ground I could prove was mine, getting more expensive to be wrong with every truckload of concrete and every paycheck Doug's crew cashed. People have asked me since why I did not get an injunction the day they poured the footings. The honest answer is that a half-finished mistake is easy to argue away and easy to walk back, but a finished one is not. A judge looking at a fresh footing can be told it will be relocated, and the matter drags on for a year while the lawyers bill. A judge looking at a completed $500,000 building, sitting partly on recorded private land with a clean chain of notices proving the owner objected from the very first stake, is looking at something nobody can pretend was an accident. And the question stops being whether it was wrong and becomes only what it will cost to make right. I had learned that lesson on the other side of the table years before, watching developers stall on small errors until the small errors were buried under expensive ones. So I let them dig that hole as deep as they cared to. I am a patient man by trade. Boundaries do not move because you are impatient with them. And they do not move because you shout. And they do not move because a woman in a magenta blazer says the word functionally. They move because the paper and the ground stop agreeing, and they snap back the instant somebody makes the paper and the ground agree again. So I let them build, and I kept the folder, and I waited for the one meeting where the paper would do all the work and I would not have to say a single angry word. That fall, Incident 5 arrived, and it was the one that frightened me. It was a Thursday, a little after 4, the light already going gold over the ridge. Nora was home alone, doing homework at the kitchen table, when 2 pickups pulled up to our gate, and 4 men got out with bolt cutters and a chain and a portable generator. They were there. One of them shouted toward the house to remove the obstruction so the contractor could stage equipment on the strip they were calling common area. I found out later the order had come straight from Brenda. She had told the site foreman that morning, in front of 2 witnesses who later told me, "The gate is on community ground now, and if the old man won't move it for him." That was the 3rd time she put her contempt into words, in a setting of its own. The work trailer instead of a meeting room. And it is the one that turned a property dispute into men at my daughter's gate with bolt cutters. Nora called me. I was at the hardware store in town, and I will never forget her voice on that line. Not crying, but tight and small and trying very hard to be calm in a way that took 10 years off my own life. "Dad," she said, "there are men at the gate. They have bolt cutters. One of them keeps telling me to come open it. What do I do?" I put down what was in my hands and walked fast to the truck, and I kept my own voice level because she needed mine level. I told her to stay inside, lock the front and the back, leave the lights on, and call the sheriff's non-emergency line and tell them men were trying to cut a private gate and that I was 9 minutes out and driving. She said okay in a small voice. Then she said, "They can't actually do this, can they?" And I told her no, they cannot, and that I had the paper to prove it, and to go lock the back door now. I made it in 7 minutes. I do not remember the drive. By the time I got there, a sheriff's truck was already pulling up behind the pickups, and the 4 men were standing around the chain looking at their boots, the bolt cutters back in the bed. Nora was at the front window. I lifted a hand to her, and she lifted one back, and only then did the shaking start in my own hands, now that there was no use for it. The deputy's name was Raymond Salas, and he is the closest thing to a hero in this story, though he would hate me for saying so, because all he did was his job exactly the way it is supposed to be done. He listened to the men say the HOA had authorized them to clear an easement, and he asked to see the authorization, and they had a work order from Vista Amenity Partners and nothing from any court. He listened to me say the land was mine, deeded and recorded, and that I could show him the pin and the plat. He held up a flat hand to both sides. "Here's how this works," he said. "I can't settle a property line standing at a gate, and I'm not going to try. What I can tell you for certain is that without a court order, nobody is cutting that chain, and these gentlemen are leaving right now." He said it without heat, the way a man says a thing he has said before, and the 4 men got in their trucks and left. Then he turned to me, quieter, and nodded toward the half-built clubhouse 3 feet over my line. "Mr. Hale, if these folks keep coming at you, you build a record. Every contact, every notice, dates and witnesses. You get a pattern documented, and you bring it somewhere it counts, a judge, the county, whoever. A pattern is what moves this, not a shouting match at a fence." I almost laughed, standing there with my hands still unsteady. I told him I had 31 years of county survey practice and a folder 2 inches thick already, with every notice photographed and dated since the first stake. He looked at me for a second, then back at the building, and he said, "Then I'd say they picked the wrong fence." That was Incident 5, and the threat to Nora went into the folder that night in my own careful hand, underlined once. I want to stop here for just a moment, because this is the part where most people would have done something they regretted. I had a daughter who had been frightened in her own kitchen. I had a building rising on my land. I had every reason in the world to drive down to Brenda Coyle's house and say things I could not take back. I did not. I went home. I sat with Nora until she stopped shaking, and we ordered a pizza and watched an old movie. And the next morning, I went back to being a surveyor about it. If you take one thing from what happened to us, let it be this. The night you are angriest is the night to write things down instead of saying them out loud. By winter, the clubhouse was nearly finished, the windows in, the great room roofed, and Brenda had grown bold enough to say the quiet part in public. The association held a ribbon planning meeting in December in a rented room at the community center because the new building was not yet accepted. And I attended, folder under my arm. The room was warm and full and smelled of coffee, and there was a tray of grocery store cookies on a card table by the door. When the floor opened and I raised the boundary again, Brenda did not even pretend to consult her professionals this time. She set her pen down, pushed her glasses up into her hair, and looked at me the way you look at a stain you have decided to ignore. "Mr. Hale?" she said, loud enough for the room to hear every word. "That strip has been functionally part of our community for years. Nobody but you thinks otherwise. Frankly, your little obsession with a fence is becoming a problem for your neighbors, who would like to enjoy their new clubhouse without one man's grievance hanging over it." A few heads nodded, few heads. That was the second of the 3 times she would publicly characterize me and my claim as a personal defect rather than a legal fact, and I wrote it down word for word in the truck afterward. The room, the cookies, the nodding heads, the phrase functionally part of our community, which is the kind of word a person reaches for when the real word, mine, has run out. A woman 2 rows up, a newer resident named Dana, caught my eye on the way out into the cold and walked with me to the lot. She kept her voice down. She said she had asked the board twice to see the survey they were relying on, because she did not like the smell of the management contract, and both times she had been told the survey was not available for distribution. She asked me, plainly, whether I had something that contradicted it. I told her I might, and I gave her my phone number, and I told her to keep asking for that survey in writing, because a request on paper is a record and a request out loud is air. She said she would. Allies announce themselves softly, if you let them, and you keep their courage by giving them something to do. The thing finally came to a head in February, at the regular monthly board meeting, the one where the association planned to formally accept the finished clubhouse from Doug's company and approve the first management payment. By then, I had spent a week getting ready, not by hiring a lawyer to shout, but by doing the one thing 31 years had trained me to do better than almost anyone in that county. I went to the recorder's office and pulled certified copies of 3 documents. My 1994 deed, with its metes and bounds description tied to the section corner, the original 1995 subdivision plat, the one bearing my stamp, my signature, and my license number, showing the common area ending a clear 3 feet west of my line, and the HOA's own recently recorded survey, the one Doug's company had commissioned, which I laid against the other 2 so that anyone could see the 3-foot difference with their own eyes. I had them certified, I had them tabbed, and I had folded inside the folder one more thing, a single sheet I had drawn myself that week, an overlay showing all 3 boundaries on one page, with the corner pin I had set in 1995 marked at its true coordinate. I did not plan to make a speech. I planned to hand a man the truth and let him read it. The board meeting was in the new clubhouse, in the great room itself. The very room whose 3 stolen feet I had come about. There were maybe 40 people there. Brenda sat at the head table in a magenta blazer with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, Doug beside her in a sport coat. And to my surprise, in a chair along the side wall, Deputy Salas. There at the board's own request to keep order, because someone had warned them I might cause a scene. I almost smiled at that. They had invited the one witness I would have chosen myself. I waded through the agenda. I waded through the treasurer's report and a long argument about pool hours. I waded through Doug's presentation of the building, the same glossy renderings, now matched to photographs of the real thing. And his proposed management fee, $11,000 a month. A number I wrote down on the pad in my lap. He was smooth about it, a man used to being believed. When Brenda asked if there was any old business before the vote, I stood, and I said only that I had recorded documents bearing on the boundary and that I wished to place certified copies before the board. Brenda sighed into the microphone, the long theatrical sigh of a woman performing Patience for an audience, and told me to keep it brief. I did not answer her. I walked to the head table, and the room got quiet the way a room does when it senses something it does not yet understand. I laid down 3 certified pages and my 1-page overlay, side by side, facing them, squared to the table edge the way I square everything. And I stepped back and put my hands in my pockets and said nothing at all. For a moment, nothing happened. Brenda glanced at the pages without really looking, her hand already lifting to wave them off and move to the vote. Then Doug picked up the plat, and I watched his face change. He saw the surveyor's stamp in the corner. He saw the signature beside it. He read the license number, and then he read the name. My name, Walter Hale. And his eyes traveled up to the certification block where it stated in the plain language of the document that the surveyor of record for the entire Stone Ridge Vista subdivision, the man who had set every monument they had built their world around, was the same man standing in front of him in a canvas coat, whose meadow they had poured their great room onto. He looked up at me once. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the page did not say better. Brenda said, "Doug?" And he did not answer her. She said it again, sharper, and reached over and pulled the overlay toward herself. And Doug turned it back so it faced the light and traced the 3 lines with 1 finger until they came apart at my corner. And I saw the exact second he understood that the building they were sitting in was 3 feet wrong, and that the proof had been recorded in the county vault for 30 years. The room held its breath. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the furnace ticking and 40 people not moving. And I let that silence sit, because the silence was the argument and I had no wish to interrupt it. Deputy Salas stood up from his chair along the wall, walked to the table, and looked down at the 3 pages. He is not a surveyor, but he did not have to be. "These are certified copies," he said, mostly to the board. "This one's the recorded plat. This is the deed. This is their survey. The lines don't match, and the plat's the oldest by 30 years. He looked at me. "That's the pattern you were building." It was not a question. I said it was. He nodded once. That was the recognition, and it cost me no speech at all. "Here is the pair of numbers I want you to hold, because they are the whole story." The association had recorded 1 survey, 22 months old, to justify taking my land. The county held 1 plat, 30 years old, that I had signed, proving the land was mine. $750 in fines they had levied against me had been collected on exactly none of them, because I had paid exactly 0. And the building they had to answer for now had cost a little over $500,000 to put up. 3 feet of it on ground, a 30-year-old document said, was never theirs to build on. What happened to the clubhouse is the part people always want to hear. And it is the cleanest example I know of a consequence falling exactly where it was earned. The association could not accept a building that encroached on recorded private property without exposing every member to liability. So the vote to accept it died on the table that night. It did not even come to account. 2 board members asked to table it. The room agreed, and the gavel never fell. Doug's company could not collect its $11,000 monthly fee on a building the association would not accept. And an $11,000 fee that never starts is a fee that never ends. The title issue meant the structure could not be insured or lawfully occupied as it stood. In the end, the only fix anyone's attorney would sign off on was to bring the building into compliance with the line I had set in 1995. Which meant cutting 3 feet off the west wall of the great room, the exact 3 feet that had made Doug's contract worth signing in the first place. The room they had stretched to enrich him was shortened back to honesty at the association's own expense, and the management deal collapsed with it. Brenda demanded the clubhouse absorb my meadow, and the meadow stayed mine while the clubhouse lost the room. She tried to take 3 feet, and 3 feet is precisely what she lost. Brenda did not finish her term. The leaked management contract, which Frank Mott did indeed produce, and which Dana helped circulate to the membership, showed the board exactly what the 3 feet had really been for. There was a special election. She was not on the next ballot. Doug's company quietly dissolved before the county finished asking it questions. Nobody went to jail, and I never wanted anyone to. I wanted my line back and my daughter safe in her own kitchen, and I got both. The strip of meadow is just meadow again. We took the orange stakes out the following weekend, Nora and I, working down the line in the cold morning air, and we stacked them by the creek for kindling. And that winter we burned every one of them in the wood stove, a few at a time. The shortened clubhouse is still down there, a perfectly nice building that stops 3 feet short of where it was never allowed to be. And once in a while, when I pass it, I think about how much it cost to learn where my pin was, when the answer had been driven 18 inches into the ground since 1995, and stamped with my own number. Nora is 17 now, and she still keeps a notebook. She told me last month she is thinking about studying surveying, or maybe the law. She has not decided. And she said it like it was no large thing, the way kids hand you the whole future in a sentence on their way to the refrigerator. I told her either one would suit her, because both of them come down to the same thing: finding out what is true and writing it down so plainly that nobody can argue. Carol would have liked that the garden is still on the bench where she wanted it, and that the line that holds it is the line I set the year before any of these people arrived. Let me tell you plainly what I would do if I were you, because this is the part I came to say. If you own land, go to your county recorder and pull your own deed and the recorded plat of your subdivision, and read the legal description until you understand it. Walk your boundary and find your monuments, the iron pins, the brass caps, the section corners, and if you cannot find them, hire a licensed surveyor to set them while the old ones can still be found. Keep a folder. When somebody sends you a notice, do not answer it angry. Photograph it, date it, and file it, and let the record grow. A pattern of documented facts is worth more than the loudest voice in any room. And the oldest clean document almost always wins. The people who perform authority are counting on you not to check. Check. If you have a story like this, a fence, a gate, a line somebody tried to move, put it in the comments, because I read them, and so do the folks who need to hear they are not crazy. Subscribe if you want more of these, because next week I am going to tell you about a man whose HOA tried to charge him for the rainwater that fell on his own roof, and what happened when the State Water Board found out who had been collecting it. Until then, walk your line And keep your folder. The ground does not lie, and neither does the paper, when you take the trouble to make them agree.